Hi everyone and welcome. We're so glad to have you join us today for our webinar on IT for IT. I'm Jill Schuler with Max Technical Training and I'm your moderator today. Today's Lunch and Learn is brought to you by Max Technical Training, premier provider of software and professional skills education for IT and business professionals, and brought to you by CC&C Solutions, a global enterprise architecture consultancy with close ties to the Open Group and TOGAF. Max has been delivering training in top technologies and methodologies for over 18 years. Training content at Max is not one size fits all, and not only do we provide standard out-of-the-box training, we also develop and deliver modified and customized training tailored to fit our clients' needs. And our training delivery is also not one size fits all. From classroom face-to-face or live virtual training to e-learning, or even one-on-one training and mentoring, we offer public classes and we also conduct a great deal of private classes for our clients. So we're just about ready to start and we have just a few housekeeping tips. Mike is going to present today for about 45 minutes and he's going to be taking questions throughout the presentation, so feel free to type your questions in the section found in your GoToWebinar doc. We are recording this webinar and we're going to be emailing a link to that recording and to the slide deck to all of you no later than tomorrow. And we want to just give you a heads up. This webinar, at the end, we're going to be giving you an offer for 20% off of 18 of our courses, so we want you to stay tuned. And with that, I am pleased to introduce to you Michael Fulton, President of CC&C Solutions, Americas Division. CC&C Solutions is a global enterprise architecture consultancy with close ties to the Open Group and TOGAF and the Open Group's architecture framework. Michael has an extensive background. He's an experienced architect with over 8 years experience in enterprise architecture and over 20 years of IT experience. He's TOGAF certified, cloud certified architect. He's led IT for IT architecture, cloud architecture, IT strategic planning, disruptive cost innovation, IT leadership, EA capability and training development, and he has experience working across the entire IT lifecycle, including time and service management, program management, project management, application development, and IT operations. Mike, do you make coffee?
I do that too.
Well, we're so glad to have you with us today, and would you just take a second and let us know who CC&C Solutions is?
Sure, thanks, Jill. As Jill mentioned, CC&C Solutions is a global enterprise architecture and IT transformation consulting, training, and implementation company. I run the Americas division, but we are a global company headquartered out of Sydney, Australia, and we really focus our company on trying to help develop and grow individuals, organizations, and the IT industry across the topics of enterprise architecture and IT capability. So that's really the focus of our company. We're active with a number of clients here in the U.S., from big to small, and we're excited to share some of our learnings about IT for IT with you today. So let's go ahead and get started with our webinar today. Hopefully folks have some interest in this topic because they've started to get a sense of and hear some of the conversation going on about IT for IT. And so I wanted to start and make sure we're all on the same page, as this is somewhat of a new topic for the industry. IT for IT really is all about coming up with a way to drive efficiency across the IT organization. It's about understanding the management of IT. It's about bringing together experts across the industry to drive best practices and a reference architecture associated with the management of IT. It's all about trying to take this thing that is done in every single company and is becoming more and more and more a part of how companies get business done, and trying to optimize it and drive value for organizations as a result of that. IT for IT is a part of the Open Group, and the Open Group manages open standards, and we'll talk a little bit about the Open Group in just a second. the way that we the way that we think about the open group is really designed to bring organizations together to help them drive information technology to drive things better, faster, and cheaper. It's about boundaryless information flow across organizations. It's about providing an opportunity for customers and suppliers to be able to gain business benefit for their organizations. And it's also about developing the individual, giving the individual an opportunity to contribute to the industry, growing the industry through the open standards development process. Now, if we look at the breadth of the open group, it is an open standard process that is global all around the world. You can see all of the different countries. We've got 40 different countries that have member organizations that are a part of the open group at this point. The open group manages a series of technical standards for the open standards for the industry. It manages Unix, the Unix standard. It manages TOGAF, which is an enterprise architecture standard. It manages Archimate, which is an architecture modeling standard. It manages IT for IT, and it is involved with several other emerging standards coming forth at this point in time, specifically standards around big data and cloud computing. So it's a great place to be. It's a great place to gain insight, and every single one of those member companies has an IT organization that's a part of it, and the vast majority of us all do IT in more or less the same way. And that's one of the big values out of this concept of IT for IT is we all, regardless of our industry, we all do IT similarly. So what are we trying to do with IT for IT? We're trying to solve a few very specific problems that we've seen in the industry over the years. First, if you think about IT in your organizations, you're probably familiar with the idea that your IT organization is very siloed. You probably have an application development shop, you have an IT operations shop, you may have a PMO, you may have an enterprise architecture team, and likely you may have an infrastructure team. Likely none of those organizations do a real great job of talking to each other. And so if the organizations don't talk to each other, more than likely they don't have any alignment on the tools that they use, and the tools don't talk to each other. And so what that means is that we've got tool sets that aren't integrated. And there's really nothing in the industry before IT for IT that's really provided guidance around how would we think about, how would we integrate tool sets in this IT management space. And so that's what we're trying to work on. And we're also trying to bring the data together in order to drive better decision making. And we want to try and make sure that our IT organizations are optimized to allow us to deal with the massive disruptive change that's coming at us and hitting us related to cloud, related to mobility and big data and bring your own device, all the things that are going on in our organization, all the operating model changes that are happening related to DevOps and Agile, all those things have to be managed. And as a fairly immature, fairly unstructured organization in our IT organizations, by and large, it's almost impossible for us to deal with all these things coming at us. And IT for IT is intended to be a way for us to try and manage and handle that. So how do we get started? IT for IT started as a consortium back about a little over 5 years ago, a little under 5 years ago. And you can see the companies on the left that were a part of that initial consortium. At this point in time, we actually have about somewhere between 75 and 80 companies that are actively engaged with IT for IT, including some of the biggest companies in the world, both from a vendor perspective, like Microsoft and Oracle and Hewlett-Packard Enterprise and ServiceNow and just a lot of the really big players are coming together to really drive conversation around how we do IT. And so that's an important piece of this picture, the fact that there is a global presence, there is a broad set of contribution coming in from across the industry that's really helping this thing come to life. Now we started out with a value chain, and over those 5 years we have continued to mature and grow and create basically a reference architecture that's now fairly robust and provides a lot of detail. And we'll talk about the details related to that here shortly. The forum actually transitioned from a consortium into the open group in 2014 and has been actively working as a part of the open group since that point in time. Now, early on, and this was probably back in just before, probably about 2013, just before the consortium came into the open group, there was a Gartner study that was sponsored, and Gartner took a look at this, and their estimate was that for the vast majority of organizations, implementing and driving an IT for IT program based on the reference architecture that was described would provide about a 5 to 20% per annum reduction in your total IT budget. That's a fairly significant number. And again, this was talking about a $1 billion IT function, which, if you do that translation real quick in your head, that's anywhere from $50 to $200 million a year. That is a fairly significant number that IT for IT potentially can drive. Now, one of the things we'll talk about as we go through this is that IT for IT does actually apply to IT organizations of all size. But imagine you were a $10 million IT function like Shell has, and this research study said you could save anywhere from 5 to 20% of your overall IT budget. You think it would be worth implementing an IT for IT program? I'm guessing it probably would be. So before we get into a little bit more of the details, I wanted to fire up a poll question for you. Make sure you're all still hanging with me and paying attention. So Jill, if we can transition over to the poll, what we'll do is we'll ask the question of which of these 4 items that we'll see on the poll here is not a problem within most IT departments today. So go.
Okay, so we'll just have you select one, and we will be closing the poll in about 10 seconds just to get everybody voting. We're at 29. 33% of you have voted. Let's keep going. 46%. Come on. 50%. We're at 54. We're looking for 100% voting. And we'll close it in 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And we have 63% voting. And I'm going to close the poll and show you what we got. That's not it. Hold on. Sorry about that. Wrong item. Mike, I apologize. I'm stuck. One moment. Kathy's right here.
We do want to definitely see those results. So
there they are.
All right, very good. It looks like we got a number of folks that weighed in on this one. Thank you for taking the time. And it looks like the broadly chosen answer was that we have no problems in IT and everything runs smoothly. Apparently, everybody is more or less in consensus that things are not all rainbows and butterflies in IT, that we've got some few problems that need to be addressed. Hopefully, by the time you get done with this conversation today, you'll understand how IT for IT can actually help us address those problems. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about what IT for IT is. First, as we've mentioned, it is a standard produced by and from the Open Group. It is still evolving, so we've got a tremendous level of detail, but it will continue to evolve and grow over the next several years. What that standard does is it provides a vendor-neutral, technology-agnostic reference architecture for managing the business of IT. It also is going to provide some details about the capabilities that are needed across the entire value chain. It's going to give us a perspective on how IT delivers value back to the business. Part of what we need to understand and know is that IT for IT is industry independent. It will work for you regardless of what industry you support, whether that might be retail or consumer goods or oil and gas or banking or insurance. IT for IT will work with the IT departments across all of those. And it is designed to work with IT today and in the future. And so it's meant to be flexible. It's meant to be a model that will sustain over time. Now, as we think about IT for IT, the first piece I wanted to share with you is the value chain. I think this is one of the most important and most unique parts of IT for IT. This concept of a value chain, this is a business strategy concept, and it's something that we have historically not seen applied to the IT space very well. And so what we've done here in IT for IT is to create this IT value chain in a way that everybody can understand, from the CIO down to the new hire IT professional. You should be able to see yourself in this value chain, and that's a key part of this. This has been vetted out with real use cases over the last several years. Lots of really great examples of how this has been used that are available to you if you're interested in that. So that's an important piece of innovation in this framework. And there's another important piece of innovation that we'll talk about in a minute. But before we talk about that, I did want to talk about kind of the second core piece of the reference architecture, and that's the value chain. Or I'm sorry, it's actually the reference architecture, that picture down in the bottom. We've got a level 1 depiction of it, a simplified picture of the reference architecture that makes it easy to understand and use. And then we actually go all the way down to a fairly detailed level 3 Archimate compliant actual reference model that can be used at the full levels of detail as well. The nice thing about this reference architecture is that it shows the functional components that are needed to deliver IT management, and it shows the data objects. It's really all about driving the data conversation, right? It's about data flows. It's about interoperability of data between functional components. It's about really bringing together the flow of data across the IT organization. Now, one critical piece that comes into play here is a concept of services, right? So the world in IT is really making a fairly significant transition to a service-oriented perspective, and there's two key components within this reference architecture that really drive and enable that conversation. The first component is the request to fulfill value stream. If you look in the upper left, you'll see it also with the little name of deliver. But the request to fulfill is really all about taking in that initial request for a service, and then through all of the different pieces of work that happen within your organization, fulfilling that service back to the end user. Okay. Now that's something that we've been doing from an IT perspective, but most standard IT frameworks have really not done that justice. Now the other piece that's in this reference architecture that I would highlight as a core piece of this service innovation are the purple bubbles along the bottom. And those purple bubbles are the service backbone. All right, we call that the service backbone because those bubbles are the different data objects that you need to deliver a service throughout its entire life cycle. Okay, and so from conceptualizing a service up in the strategy to portfolio phases to starting to put together the design of the service and the information that you need around service level agreements and requirements to deploy, to actually having the service available in a service catalog for production request in the request to fulfill section, and then having configuration items that map out the physical instantiation of services for operational purposes in the detect and correct space. The service backbone is what really holds together this new concept of service orientation across our IT management framework. So that's a key innovation that's a really powerful part of this framework. Now the next thing that we'll see on our next slide is that there's a lot more to this than a couple of pretty pictures, right? So in the reference architecture, what you would find is a fairly significant level of detail around each of the individual functional components and what they do and what they're for. You'll find that detailed picture like you can see on each of these 4 pieces, different value streams. We've got the level 3 depiction that we show here. And then you'll also find key performance indicators. For each of the elements of the value streams, we have identified what are the most important things to measure about that to make sure that we're driving the right behaviors across our IT organization. So I think that's another valuable piece of work. I will say we've got some initial stuff there. That space, the idea of intelligence and reporting, is one of the active work groups that we have going on right now. So we're continuing to evaluate metrics and reporting and trying to drive improvements there, not just within the value streams, but also trying to really get crystal clear on what are the most important metrics for an IT organization at the value chain level, right? So that's another key piece of what we've got going on. Now, we can also talk about the technology components that are kind of laid out here. And so when we look at this detailed reference architecture, as you can see here on screen, we've got these data objects, but then there's typically applications that help drive and pass data back and forth throughout this. And so what we've done with this reference architecture is we've abstracted applications out into these functional components so that you can use this to basically identify a logical construct, and then you can map the tools that you may have in place back to these functional components so you can understand where you have gaps and where you have overlaps within your IT management architecture. The other thing that we're doing is ultimately the next level of detail, and it'll start to come in the reference architecture version 2.1. We're actually going to be defining for each of these data objects, we're going to be defining the APIs and the data structures that need to be in place so that we can drive some interoperability across the tools market for IT. There's no reason for tools not to be able to easily talk to each other, but today if you have had any association with IT management tools, you know very well that data does not flow very easily between your portfolio management systems and your configuration management databases and all the other tools along the way. And so this is a key piece of what we're trying to drive with this detailed reference architecture. Now, one of the things that's useful to understand is what are people saying about this? IT for IT has been out there for a little while. It's been publicly available as part of the open group for well over a year now. It's actually been available for consortium members for several years, and so there's been a lot of usage and a lot of kind of visibility to this across the IT industry. And so one of the things that folks are saying, at least in my experience, is that everybody sees themselves in this this IT value chain. The IT value chain is a really important piece of the puzzle. It's very easy for different people in different parts of the organization to understand where they fit. I would really challenge you, and I'd love to hear on the Q&A, if you look at this value chain and you don't immediately see where you sit as an IT professional, I'd like to hear what we're missing, because I haven't heard a lot of that to date. So that's a really valuable piece of the perspective, and I don't think we've seen necessarily a depiction of the management of IT that lends itself so easily to being understood by so many people. So that's a critical thing that people are saying. Another thing, when we talk about the more detailed reference architecture level, people are talking about what this reference architecture provides that ITIL doesn't. It's providing a prescriptive set of information about what functionality and data is actually needed to deliver the business of IT. ITIL is a fabulous thing. We'll talk a little bit more about ITIL later in our presentation. And ITIL has a tremendous amount of information around business processes, but ITIL is not very descriptive or prescriptive. It does not tell you what you have to do when it comes to what tools you need, what functionality you need, and what data you need across the landscape. It's more focused on business processes. And you'll find the same thing is true with COBIT as well, which is another IT management framework that is similar in its scope and comprehension. It's got a different focus. ITIL's focus is really on IT operations management historically. COBIT's focus is really on IT governance historically. IT for IT's focus is on the entire IT value chain, on the bigger picture, and helping provide context and interoperability across IT. So it's, again, a very different kind of a focus. So we're going to flip it back over to Jill here. We're going to ask another question. Hopefully everybody's hanging with us and paying attention. So what is IT for IT?
Here we go. So just select one. We have 5%, 10%, 24%, 38%. Oh, you guys are doing great. Okay, let's give it another 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, we'll close the poll and we'll share the results.
Look at that. Very impressive. Almost everybody got that one right. The answer is D, all of the above. IT for IT is a high-level look at how IT delivers value. It is a prescriptive reference architecture, and it is a fairly significant change over previous frameworks that we had in the IT management space. So speaking of frameworks, let's look a little bit at some of those frameworks. That'll be our next conversation. So we've talked a little bit about ITIL and COBIT. Hopefully you guys are all familiar with both of those, but if you're not, COBIT is an IT governance framework. ITIL is an IT operations framework. You've also got frameworks like Prince2 and PMBOK for project and program management. You've got frameworks like TOGAF for enterprise architecture, SAFe for Agile. CMMI is a maturity framework. And then you've got the ISO and the ANSI standards that also play in this space. What you'll see in all of those standards is that there's not a very high level of prescription in the standard. They're primarily a narrative. and largely conceptual. And typically they often talk about mostly business processes. Now you'll see from this picture, right, that this is not unique to the IT industry. By producing these kinds of frameworks, we actually provide these kinds of frameworks in other industries as well. Finance has GAAP and XBRL. HR has HRXML. The retail sector has ARTS. Banking has BIAN. So there's a whole bunch of, obviously I'm not reading them off all of them, there's a whole bunch of different potential industry standards, and this kind of depicts how IT for IT relates to some of those other standards. And as you'll see here, IT for IT covers the scope of many different frameworks within the IT management space, and it is designed to work very nicely with all of those other frameworks. The most common question I get is IT for IT and ITIL. That's something that everybody seems to immediately gravitate to and say, how do these things kind of tie out? And so we've provided here a little bit of additional details around the difference between ITIL and IT for IT. So I'm not going to read all this to you. There's a couple of key differences I'll highlight, and I've already talked about a couple of them. The first is the level of prescription. ITIL is largely a narrative description of best practices, whereas IT for IT is meant to be a more prescriptive reference architecture. They're designed to do different things. ITIL is actually corporately owned and managed versus something that's been driven out of a open standards process. So ITIL is proprietary. It's not an open standard. And so those are a couple of key differences. The other thing I would say is a key difference is that ITIL is more focused on its historical roots of IT operations. IT for IT came along at a different time, trying to solve a different problem, and so IT for IT really came through looking at the bigger picture of the work of IT across the board. So I wanted to hit on a couple of items related to the value propositions for IT for IT. For customer organizations, for consuming organizations that would use this, companies like here locally Cincinnati Financial or Great American or Kroger's or P&G, those kind of companies are going to be this first bucket. This is going to allow you to reduce the total cost of ownership of your IT management suite. Trying to drive this industry standard, getting tool vendors to play together, getting some standards around how we manage IT. It's going to allow you to identify where your gaps and overlaps are. It's going to allow you to better understand the data flow across your organization, to make better decisions, and to bring your costs down. That's a key value add, and I take you back to that Gartner study that we talked about that suggests for a company of about $1 billion IT budget, somewhere between 5 and 20% of that budget can be reduced through an IT for IT implementation. And I'll talk in a minute here once we talk through these value propositions on how you would do this for a smaller company, but IT for IT also applies to smaller companies as well. Now the software vendors, obviously the key here for software vendors is that a lot of this IT management market is becoming commodity. And so it's important for them as well to be able to deliver that commodity software at the lowest cost possible in a way that adds value to their customers. So integrated solutions help provide that value. It also opens up the opportunity for companies like IBM and HPE and Microsoft and others to actually focus on where they can differentiate and uniquely add innovation rather than trying to spend all their time managing commodity software. So that's an important value for the software vendors, and as as you can see through the engagement of a number of those different vendors, it's clearly coming out to them that there is significant value to them as organizations. Now the next set of folks that we'll talk about are the software integrators. This is an opportunity for them to actually put a little more rigor behind the implementations or the integrations that they do for us as IT organizations. It allows them, rather than having these touchy-feely transformation opportunities, it allows them to really have a structured, rigorous approach for dealing with transformation of the IT department. And so I think that's an important value add for them that turns around and provides higher quality delivery from them to lower costs to us as customers. So that's a critically important piece. And then the last piece I'll highlight is for individuals. I think it's important for individuals to understand IT for IT as a personal development opportunity. I think unlike ITIL, which it has plenty of value in and of itself, what IT for IT does a better job of is it provides you an additional set of information about context. We all have the jobs that we do on a day in, day out basis, but very rarely do we get that ability to get some training that really helps us better on the context of how the rest of the organization works. And that's what IT for IT does. And so for me, particularly when you move, when you're looking to advance over your career and you're likely to move from different roles within an IT organization over time, understanding the bigger picture, understanding the context will allow you to be a better professional. It will allow you to be a better manager of people. It will allow you to be a better leader of an IT organization. So I think it's a great development opportunity for IT professionals everywhere. Now, obviously, some of you are here because you've never heard of IT for IT before, or it's fairly new to you. Where is the evolution of this standard? I think it's important to kind of understand that. And I won't talk through all the different pieces of this, but there's a whole series of content now available from the open group, free to members, available for purchase for non-members, related to reference cards, pocket guides, the full reference standard, a management guide that explains how to implement this. Some really good stuff associated with that. You can see from a downloads perspective, more than 700 organizations around the world have downloaded the standard. Almost 3,000 individuals around the world have downloaded the standard and started to take a look at it. It's getting a lot of discussion over on Twitter, with 600 tweets in the last month. And that's not even an updated number. I know it's above 600, but I haven't got the final numbers for January on that. So this is something that's starting to get some traction within the industry, and there is a whole series of events where IT for IT will be discussed in 2016. So definitely something that is worth understanding and starting to engage with and decide whether you want to be a part of that. Now here at Max, we do have an introduction to IT for IT. We've got a course coming up. It's designed to give you more information on what IT for IT is and how you can use it within your organization. If you're interested, we'll talk a little bit more about that here shortly, but it is coming up on February 24th, and we'll take you to the next level of detail over what we've talked about today. But I will offer up another poll question. So Jill, if you can flip over to this poll question real quick. What I would like to find out from all of you is we're actually looking at offering up a whole series of IT for IT related courses, and I wanted to see which of those you might be interested in learning more about. So this is unlike the last poll, this is a multiple choice poll, so you can check as many of the alternatives as you would like.
Okay. This will really help us just take the temperature of the interest out there. This is great. So we're at 43%, and we'll take another few seconds to finish with everybody voting. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you very much. Would you like to see how that turned out, Mike?
Yes, please. Great. So it looks like we've got a fairly decent interest in all of the courses, so thank you for that. But definitely that foundation level certification and the introduction course seem to be the two that have the most interest. So we'll make sure that we turn those around. Just as a quick aside, the foundation level course is, or I'm sorry, the introduction level course is available, and as mentioned, it'll be offered through Max on February 24th, I think it was.
That's correct.
And you can sign up through the Max website. The foundation level certification, that is actually in the final processes of being decided on and approved by the Open Group. So that should be publicly available starting in April for providers worldwide. Here at Max, we will be one of the first providers to offer up IT for IT. Actually, myself and my team at CC&C, we have been a part of the development of the training and certification program. I actually led the work to develop the training and certification program for IT for the Open Group, and we're in the process of developing an IT for IT foundation level course. So that as soon as we get kind of the stamp of approval from all the member companies of the Open Group, that'll be available, and Max will be one of the first places you can find that course. But in the meantime, let's do another poll real quickly. The last one was more information. This one is more specifically, would you be interested in taking that course? So if you can go sign up today, is that a course that you would definitely consider signing up for? So we'll let everybody answer the poll question real quick.
I appreciate how quickly everybody's responding. We're almost there. We'll take another few seconds. This really helps us. And we'll close it in about 4 seconds. 3, 2, 1. Thank you. Okay.
All right, let's go ahead and look at that poll result.
Okay, here we go.
Okay. Looks like a few of you are very interested. So for those of you that are interested or very interested, make sure you hang around to the end of the presentation today, where you'll see a special offer from Max on availability and of that course that can save you 20%. So to kind of close out my presentation today, I did want to leave you with one final thought. As we've been talking about IT for IT all day, I believe that IT for IT is the future of managing the business of IT. And I would ask you the question, are you and your organization ready to embrace that future? So with that, I'll leave you some connection information. I am happy to answer questions here now, which we'll switch over to the question slide in just a second. But if you don't get your questions in, or would just like to follow me to learn more about IT for IT, you can connect me with LinkedIn, email, Twitter, whatever your heart's content is. So.
Thank you, Mike. And now we can take any of your questions. And I also wanted to point out and draw your attention over to the handouts on your screen. You can download 2 of Mike's handouts at the bottom. They are in PDF, and that may be helpful information for you. And in this slide, we wanted you to see which courses provide the 20% off discount for those of you who have attended. And I'd love for Mike to just kind of give you a brief, any additional information about the enterprise architecture courses that are coming up.
Yeah, those enterprise architecture courses over there on the left are all provided by CC&C Solutions. The Introduction to Enterprise and IT Architecture is a one-day course designed to really give you some of the basics around architecture, the value of architecture, and some of the different approaches for doing architecture, as well as how to get yourself started on a career into architecture, if that's of an interest. Introduction to IT, IT for IT is a one-day course that we already talked about. Solution architecture for the practitioner is really designed to be an in-depth discussion of how to actually do solution architecture. It's a two-day course where we dig into a lot of the details and really come out the other side with a fairly broad set of knowledge about executing solution architecture. And then TOGAF is our TOGAF 9-1 certification course. That is a 4-day course that will come out the other side with the exam voucher for a TOGAF certification. TOGAF is one of the industry's leading certifications right now. It actually, according to some studies that have been done, produces about a 6% increase in pay over non-TOGAF certified architects. So it is a very valuable certification. And this course will actually, in the 4 days, will teach you not only how to pass the test and get your TOGAF certification, but we'll also teach you how to do enterprise architecture and apply the enterprise architecture thinking beyond just what the book says about TOGAF. So that's the courses we offer within the enterprise architecture realm from CC&C. There's a whole lot of other wonderful courses in that IT management space over on the right-hand side as well. So by all means, take a look at those. Take advantage of that 20% off if that's of interest to you.
Thanks, Mike. We do have a couple of questions that have come in. The first one is, does this work with Agile or DevOps?
Great question, Jill. It absolutely does. Agile and DevOps are both techniques for how to do the work. They're not explaining what you do. The IT for IT reference architecture explains what you do when it comes to project management processes, development processes, and operations processes. Agile and DevOps describe how you actually execute those. So IT for IT is designed to work with both waterfall and Agile. It's designed to work with a siloed operations and development organization or a DevOps organization. It's designed to work with organizations that do everything manually or with organizations that automate everything. And so it really is set up to be able to work with a gamut of techniques that you might use in the IT management space. I would also offer up, and I meant to mention this earlier, one of the things that we have seen is that IT for IT also applies to every company regardless of size, because every company has IT in it somewhere, right? And it doesn't matter if you're 2 people in a garage or you're a $10 billion IT shop like Shell, you still need IT for IT. And the difference really becomes how much of what's going on in IT for IT is implicit versus explicit. When you are 2 people in a garage, there's only a couple of the functional components that you need to be explicit about that you need to document. You need to have a code repository. You need to have your package builds documented and managed properly. You don't need an enterprise architecture explicitly done because you can manage that in your head. And that's the way the thing works. You do need to have the thought processes. You need to be thinking about all the different pieces, but you don't actually have to make them explicit. But as your company grows, as your IT department grows, more and more of the reference architecture actually needs to be made explicit, needs to be documented, needs to be incorporated into tooling so that you can manage the breadth of the IT organization. So that's another key element of this that works very nicely. We're actually in the process as a standards body of working through a methodology and an implementation order for when you should use which functional components, so that it can provide some guidance around that very issue.
Thanks, Mike. I do have one other question, and that is, that's here. Do I need IT for IT in a world of cloud or big data?
Another great question, Jill. Thank you for asking, or whoever asked. Yes, you do. We talked a little bit about this new concept of services. Services are absolutely critical in a world cloud. Cloud is all about infrastructure, platform, and software as a service. Cloud is a service-oriented model, and so the service elements that have been built into IT for IT are a perfect fit with cloud computing. The other thing I would say is that when you think about big data or Internet of Things, what you're talking about are simply, can be conceptualized as simply more granular, different types of services. And so you can apply some of the same processes, some of the same thinking to those services. It's important to again, think through that implicit versus explicit concept. You don't want to over-engineer the sensor that costs you 5 cents, but you do need to have some sort of an idea of a construct of what happens when that sensor fails. What am I going to do? What happens? What am I going to do with the data? How do I secure the data? What are all the different pieces that I need to take into account related to the service level agreement for that sensor and the expectations when it calls back into the mothership? So both cloud and big data, as well as Internet of Things, are very applicable in the IT for IT space as well.
Mike, we just got another question come in, and the question is, what is the difference between enterprise architecture and IT for IT?
Good question. Enterprise architecture is really all about city planning for IT. We're managing the IT landscape. We're managing the enterprise business processes and information. We're taking and driving the strategies of an organization and translating those strategies into an executable plan. We're aligning that plan with the organization. So that's what enterprise architecture is. IT for IT is a reference architecture for a single vertical of your enterprise. Your enterprise is going to have an IT vertical. It's going to have a human resources vertical, a finance vertical, a supply chain vertical. It may have other verticals of work, sales and marketing. IT for IT is a reference architecture specifically designed for the management of the IT vertical. There would be other reference architectures that would be designed for the human resources vertical or the finance vertical, etc. Now, the way that actually it's kind of rolls in on top of itself, we've incorporated an enterprise architecture functional components into IT for IT, because historically and most typically, enterprise architecture is a key part of how we actually do the work of IT. There is and can be part of enterprise architecture that actually happens outside of IT as well, but we definitely need to use enterprise architecture approaches and thinking to manage the work of IT. And so that's how the two actually relate. Does that make sense?
I believe, yes.
Good.
So that seems to be all of the questions that we have, and we just wanted to make sure that everyone is aware of the 5 fast facts for Max, with our money-back guarantee, employer insurance, free retakes, guaranteed to go, and actually this is a pretty hopping place for our students, and they love being here. And Mike, we are thrilled that you've been able to help us out and understand a lot of new material and give people a good idea of what this is and get started in thinking about, is this something that they need to be considering for themselves. I want to remind everyone that this session has been recorded and that you will receive a link to the slide deck and to the recording no later than tomorrow. And if you have any other questions about our Max offerings, please feel free to let us know.
One other reminder, Jill, grab those handouts before we close out real quick.
Yes.
They will not be sent to you. Those are available only for webinar participants. So thanks for calling in. I appreciate everybody's time today, and hopefully you get some value out of those handouts. And if you have any questions on anything that we've talked today, again, you can follow up directly with me or with Max. Hopefully we'll see you in one of our classes.
That's awesome.